It says that it's disabled.
Uh-oh, see, that's why we do these things. Let me see. Hold on, let me click on make share screen.
Or if you just made me a co-host, that would just
Yeah,
give
I'll
me
do
the
that.
ability.
Okay. I made you a co-host and try it.
Okay.
We're on live, guys. And it is 6 o'clock.
Can you drop that link in the chat
For the meeting?
for the live?
Okay, I will. We are live.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being in attendance to our virtual nationwide Free the 13th Amendment rally. Today is day 3 of 4 very powerful days, and we have some amazing, amazing speakers tonight. So I hope that you're ready, because I am, and I look forward to all of the conversations that we'll have surrounding the 13th Amendment and all the information that our speakers will bring forward. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce to you the first speaker of the night. The first speaker of the night is Benu Hannibal. He is the founder and spokesperson of Free Alabama Movement. In 2013, in conjunction with organizing the first multi-prison work strikes and boycotts in Alabama, he began guerrilla clandestine filming and documentation of the living conditions and personal testimonies in the Alabama Department of Corrections, while building a social media platform to expose the same. This information was released on January 1st, 2014, the first day of their strike in 2016. BAM organized the first nationwide prison strike on September 9th, 2016, the 45th anniversary of the Attica Rebellion, which at that time was the largest prison strike in the United States history. In 2017-2018, he organized the nationwide campaign to redistribute the pain, which was a bi-monthly boycott campaign of canteen, incentive packages, collect phone companies, and visitation vending machines. Benu continues to organize under the Free Alabama Movement flag while serving a life sentence without parole in the Alabama Department of Corrections. Thank you for joining us tonight, Benu. I really look forward to what you have to share with us.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate being here. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks to everyone for joining in and supporting this Free the 13th virtual rally. This conversation is very important about the experience of Black people here in America, the institution of slavery, what we've been through over the last 400 plus years. I also want to acknowledge the people in the state of Philadelphia right now who are out in the street mourning the loss of yet another person whose life has been taken by the slave catchers. This man was gunned down. He had mental health issues, and it's just a recurring theme that we've heard over and over and over again for over 400 years. So starting out, my discussion today will be about how the current characteristics of the institution of slavery look inside the prison system. We have to be mindful always that the institution of slavery has changed. It does not look the same as it looked in 1800s or the 1700s or the 1600s. It looks different. And one of the things that has impacted that change and impacted the look and impacted the characteristics has been technology. And technology has impacted the institution of slavery. For example, back in the era when we were in the cotton fields on the plantation picking cotton, technology created the combine and the cotton picking machine. And so that changed the dynamics of what slavery looked like. And then we had the system of slavery that existed when the 13th Amendment first came into existence after the Civil War. At that time, we had a war-torn country that needed to be repaired. And so our labor was used in a different way. It was used to go out and to repair bridges, to repair roads, and to rebuild rebuild this country. And technology changed that to an extent. When technology came and created the road graders and the different things, so they removed our labor from that area. Also in energy, when coal was the chief energy source of this nation, and people who were incarcerated were forced to go out into the coal mines, especially down here in the South, and dig this coal. And a lot of people lost their lives in these coal mines until technology changed and brought us out of the coal mine. And so these are just some of the internal factors that define the characteristics of the institution of slavery over the past several hundred years. What I'll be talking about is some of the external factors that influence the institution of slavery, what that looks like today, and explain how understanding these things can make us more effective in challenging the institution of slavery. Okay, so in 1972, from the year 1972 to the year 2010, we went from 17,500,000 manufacturing jobs to 11,500,000 manufacturing jobs. During that time, we were introduced to new terms and phrases. And I'm just going to give some of those phrases because at the time when we were hearing these phrases, they didn't say that they had something to do with prisons or mass incarceration. And we didn't understand them that way, but we understand them now. Some of those phrases were things like outsourcing, globalization, sweatshops, downsizing, buyouts, mergers. And I remember being a teenager and I had a family member, she worked at Dunlap. And so I remember when they were being laid off. And so I saw the technology firsthand because I saw one of those robotic arms applying a fender to a car and putting on tires to a car. And so these robots were replacing human labor. And so at that time, this country was also going through a recession. And so with these robots, what occurred was that human labor was being replaced because it could be done cheaper through the technological advancements, just like with the cotton picker, just like with the road, just like with the road graders and the equipments that they use in the coal mines. And so these were now impacting the larger society. And so with downsizing and with technology, a lot of these people were reduced and pulled from the labor market. And so the term outsourcing came into effect. And so we started seeing a lot of manufacturing jobs shipped overseas. And I used the country of China just as an example because we saw everyone's familiar with the made in China, made in China. So there were a lot of cheap, low skilled, low wage jobs outsourced to these countries across seas because they were low paying and low skilled, and the producers, the corporations could not afford to make those products here in America and still make a profit. So a lot of that stuff was shipped overseas. Okay, so what that started doing was driving a lot of manufacturing companies out of business in the United States. And so they approached the legislators and the policymakers with these concerns. And so rules were changed and policies were changed. And this is what gave the corporations access back to the prisons again. And so remember, again, this is in the 70s and the 80s period when all of the prisons were being built. And so at the same time, we had the large agriculture companies buying up all the land around the world, buying up all the agriculture, which was putting a lot of farmers and a lot of rural areas out of business. And so the replacement business in these rural communities became prisons. So prisons started being built. And when these prisons were being built, these laws had been changed and these policies had been changed, giving these manufacturers access to the prison labor. And so manufacturing plants were being built right alongside or inside of the prisons. And so this is how technology in society affected how labor was used inside of the prison. Go to the legislators, to go to the policymakers and give us to that labor. And so now, instead of having to outsource or ship overseas to sweatshops, they were able to use the prisons as the sweatshops in America. And so these manufacturing plants were put inside these prisons, and then they were outsourced to the private corporations and the government entities. And so that's what occurred. And so that's the characteristics of the prison slave labor industry that we're fighting today. And so with that, we saw the population rise from 300,000 people incarcerated to over 2.3 million people incarcerated. And so these 2.3 million people were then placed inside these institutions as a form of human trafficking to provide jobs, human warehousing to provide jobs to these people in the agricultural communities, and to give the manufacturing sector access to the plants that were being built with taxpayer dollars. But then the companies would come in and make their products and sell them on the open market. And so this is how the prison labor has been made into a commodity today. This is the reason why it has the value that it has today. This is how they valued the labor over the years as technology evolved and changed. And so, but another example I want to give, when the sweatshops came back to the United States, the commissioner for the Oregon Department of Corrections, he reached out to Nike and requested that they move their factories from overseas into this country and put it inside of the Oregon prison system and allow them to make the product. And so, like the commissioner for the Department of Corrections, other commissioners around the country have been able to bring private corporations into these prisons and build these products instead of sending them overseas. And so you see names like McDonald's, you see names like Wendy's, and you see products like eyeglasses and dentures, not just tag plants anymore. This is a very sophisticated operation and network of organizations working together. But technology has played a very important role in what it is that this prison labor characteristics look like today. And so Nike had to back out because they could not afford the bad press that goes along with being associated with this type of industry. And so this is a strategy that's available to us as we continue to try to challenge and dismantle this system of prison slavery that's going on inside these prisons today. One final thing I want to cover, I just want to ask a question. I want to pose a question to the audience. What would the 13th Amendment look like if it had been drafted by slaves? It would be much different. There would not be an exception. There would have been compensation. There would have been reparation. There would have been wholeness. There would have been justice. But because we've never been made whole in the beginning, then this is what continues to allow us to be vulnerable to the system that's in place to re-enslave us today. When people have reparations, they have the resources to build a community that is not surrounded by the slave catchers. We have the ability to afford the resources that we need. For example, the person who was just murdered in the streets in Philadelphia, his mother could have afforded the resources to get him the mental health treatment that he needed that would have saved his life. And many people who are incarcerated or enslaved, whichever term you want to use, would not have had to violate or be accused of being violated the laws or whatever it is that allowed them to be put back into this system. So this conversation about the 13th Amendment is very broad, and it's not just what we see on the plantation or inside the prison. It's not just the conditions. The last couple of days, we talked about the internal factors. These are the conditions. These are the 13th Amendment. But we also have to be mindful of the external factors that change the characteristics so that we can understand it. Because if a person is not aware of how external factors have changed the characteristics of what the institution of slavery looked like, then they don't have the ability to challenge it or to change it. And so that concludes my speech. I just wanted to break down those external factors to provide insight into what the current institution of slavery looks like inside of the prison system, and to put this information out there in a way that allows us to be effective in challenging and dismantling the corporations, the corporate structure, the political structure, but most importantly, the economic structure. And the economic structure breaks down to the actual labor that's being done by the slave personally. And that's something that only the person who is doing the labor can change. And so fundamentally, the movement towards abolishing slavery places a burden and duty on the slave also to take an active role in abolishing slavery. First and foremost, no more labor on the plantation. That has to become the politics of the institution of slavery before this system can be effectively dismantled. Ben Hannibal Rassan, Free Alabama Movement.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Benu.
Peace.
You
Peace.
really, you really brought light to something that a lot of people don't really realize. They don't realize when they pull up to Wendy's and when they pull up to McDonald's and when they roll into Starbucks, or, some of the things that people purchase to wear on their bodies has, is a derivative of prison labor. So, I really thank you for bringing all of those points to us. It looks like I want to go ahead and see if we have some questions for you. If you can hang tight for me just for a moment so I can check and see what questions that we have available, if you're free to answer those right now.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Looks like this question says, as a person on the inside who works in order to provide a way of life for myself, what do you recommend when you're saying no more prison labor? Is there just a way to, how can a person still work? Because a lot of people who are inside, they don't have family and they don't have a way to provide life for themselves. And in some places, the wages are so low, but if this person feels like they make a fair amount of money that they can take care of themselves while incarcerated, what do you say to that?
I would say a couple of things. First and foremost, each person has to make their own individual decision based on their individual circumstances. So if a person has absolutely nothing and they feel like the only way that they can survive is to continue to work this job, then I can't tell them, I can't walk their walk, I can't walk their struggle. My advice, or what I'm saying, it relates to the bigger issue of the institution of slavery. And there's no way around the dismantling of the institution without removing the labor. There's just no way around it. The ancestors have said that there can be no slavery without the slave. And so sacrifice becomes paramount because there's no way around the fact that your labor is responsible for your oppression. Your labor, your contributions are responsible for your personal oppression. If you want out of prison, not only do you have to internalize this mindset as a way of life, but you have to show through dedication, commitment to teach others to embrace the same thing. And see, this is where allies, supporters, sponsors, and people who say that they're here to help us, this is why it's important for them to listen to the voice of the slave, to help us get a particular type of message out. Not carry it to the legislator, not carry it to the councilman, not carry it to the representative, but to carry it directly to the plantation. This is where the post-up needs to be at, directly at the plantation. And then the brother Yusuf, who's coming on next, he's going to talk about some of these corporations. And I gave you the example of what Nike did. And there are other corporations who are divesting from the prison system. And so we need for our allies and our supporters to build these campaigns just as well. But there's simply nowhere around the fact that if you are in prison, you have to get to a point. But also it has to be organized. And we have to organize it and set a date that where we say, this is the point where we start, this is the point of no return. We had a point of no return on the continent of West Africa in our homeland from the country of Ghana. We have to build a point of no return on the plantation also. We cannot return back to the factory. We can't keep going to the canteen and store. We can't keep picking up the wall phone. We have to have a point of no return if we ever want to leave the institution of slavery behind. I'm gonna close with this parable. In the Bible, when Sarah and Job were leaving I forgot the name of the land, but he told her, don't look back or you turn into a pillar of salt. And so that's my message. When you make this commitment to freedom, don't look back. When you say, I'm gonna give it all up, just give it all up and don't look back. And that's the point of consciousness that we have to get inside the prisons before the institution of slavery can be dismantled, because they can repeal and replace every constitutional amendment, every slave amendment, every 13th Amendment they want to. When these people call, work call, mail call, if you continue to get up and go and answer the call, then the work has been in vain. Peace.
Yes, thank you so much. I did just have one last question. It says, what are some of the things you'd like to see those of us on the outside do to help you all to overcome this?
The most important thing is education. We need to get a particular curriculum together where we're sending particular information in. There are a lot of people that's sending information in, but it's too many different kinds of information. You got people reading just all different types of foreign stuff that we don't have time to be wasting people's minds, focus, and attention. Everything needs to be focused and centered on the solution and the problem. And so that would be one of the things. The second thing, like I said, is to help us gather information about these corporations and about these industries so that we can get that information out and show people exactly what's going on. And that's the reason why I wanted to speak on the subject matter that I did today about understanding what is the prison slave labor industry today, because people still have it in their minds that is you out in the cotton field or you breaking rocks or whatever, but that's not where we are today. Technology has changed that. Technology has made us a part of the world economy, the manufacturing sector, and now the service sector. So we're providing services like we're answering call centers for AT&T. We're going out and doing services inside of the communities, but we're also manufacturing products on large manufacturing plants all around the country. We mine for sand. We have fish farms. We have cattle farms. They have a dairy farm out west where they get the milk, and this milk is what you order when you go to McDonald's and some of these other restaurants and get milk with your coffee. And so all of these things are part of the system. The clothing that you wear, the eyeglasses that you wear, the dentures that you have in your mouth. There are so many products and services that are part of this thing now that most people don't even associate with it, that it's hard for people to understand how to attack it. And so we have to have a more narrow approach around what the institution of slavery looks like and what the characteristics are today in 2020. So that would be just some of the things that I would put out there.
I mean, and that's, I think, and I thank you so much for sharing this information, because I think that people really fail to realize how close to home this really hits. You know, you don't think about it until you recognize that, you know, hey, maybe my dentures, maybe my partial is, you know, somebody inside prison made that, you know, and so people don't really understand that. And that's why, and I mean to like press you for more, but that's really why I wanted to kind of put it out there, because I think that the lack of education is a part of the biggest problem. So, all right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate you for being here with us today. I look forward to maybe you being able to a little bit later for some questions if possible. If not, we do understand. All right, up next, let's see who our next speaker is that I have available. I know it is someone amazing and someone that many people look to admire. She is Bayview managing editor, New Bay Brown. She's a new abolitionist and activist, also working with Prison Focus to facilitate, liberate the caged voices. She is actively co-leading the Liberate Our Caged Elders social media campaign, guided by the Prison Human Rights Movement Blueprint. New Bay currently hosts Prison Focus Radio on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 for anybody in the area. Thursdays from 11 to 12 p.m. and seeks to dismantle the prison industrial slave complex and replace the transformative healing justice paradigm where slavery is abolished once and for all. New Bay, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it and look forward to all you're going to bring to this forum. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I mean, I feel like it's very humbling to be in the presence of all these amazing people that are on this panel and to be invited to this. Excuse me for coming in a little bit late. Was on another Zoom call, as you all can imagine. I'm sure that same thing is happening for all of you. But when I heard the last person speaking was about education, and I'm thinking that I'm understanding that it might have been in the vein of just, at least for me, it's educating the public. And again, that's a very humbling space to be in, because I'm also still learning, and who I am learning from are the people that are on the inside. So through the lens of understanding that modern day slavery is taking place, as I see it, inside of our prisons, and then the men and women that I am working with, primarily they are men that have been subjected to the decades of the torture of solitary confinement, multiple parole denials. They've been in prison for 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years. They've been caged inside of our prisons. To me, that's modern day slavery. And one of the main reasons why these men have been subjected to solitary confinement is simply to break them, because of the books that they read, the ideologies that they carry, the education that they are sharing with others about who they are as Black people in America. And so this crisis, this crimes against humanity that started over 400 years ago with enslaving African people and indigenous people, having it present today, and for now having a new iteration of it happening inside of our prisons is what drives me to do this work that I do for supporting the prisoner human rights movement. And I wanted to, let's see, so I'm not sure how to continue, except I would like to share the campaign. And I say I'm co-leading it, and leadership is a word that I don't wear very well. But I am working with the men that have been, again, subjected to these decades of the torture of solitary confinement, and came together. They came together in a hunger strike that involved, by the time they did the third one, 30,000 people to end indefinite solitary confinement. And these men are principle thinkers, and they came together and created something called the Agreement to End Hostilities, where they came together across geographical lines, all races came together, created this document so that they literally could stop the torture of solitary confinement. And they did it not only for themselves, so that they could survive, but they knew they were watching the young people coming into the prisons, because we know all about the school to prison pipeline, coming in, and they knew that they were going to be subjected to this if they didn't stop it. So they really put their lives on the line. And they came up also with a blueprint. And I want to read a little bit of of how I want to read a part of it, because I'm following them. I mean, I'm grateful to be able to be outside here and be moved by what's happening on our watch, modern day slavery, because I realize that there are thousands, millions of people that are still not on board. And I will say that it even as I started to understand that slavery was taking place within our prisons, I still had a hard time understanding it until I then met Jokashima Jinsai, who is going to be one of the speakers, I think, tomorrow. And again, just brilliant person. And he is the one, he founded Amend the 13th campaign. And that's the first time that I heard about it. And I was 50. Well, no, I'm 56. So I was 51 years old. And I'm just now understanding that there's an exception clause to the 13th Amendment. And so I know that there are thousands and millions of other people that still don't know. But again, the work of Max Parthas and others, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because I think that it is to our spiritual human detriment when you don't know that slavery is taking place with in right now on our watch. So I'm just providing a platform for the amazing revolutionary humanitarian, for the sake of humanitarian work that these guys are doing on the inside. But here's a part of the prisoner human rights movement blueprint overview. So I'm just going to start here. The prisoner human rights movement, PRHM blueprint, is essentially designed to deal with identifying and resolving primary contradictions by focusing on the various problems of CDCR's dysfunction, including but not limited to the following areas. The systemic problems we face on 180 and 270 designed level testing staff's performance of the culture of CDCR staffing. The prisoners inmate welfare funds. So there, I was about to curse, sorry. So they first start off talking about 180 and 270, it means how from the guard tower, how much they can see the prisoners on the yard, and basically see how they can pick them off if they have now set up riots, instigating and fomenting violence, and then they can see how easily they can pick them off. Then two, the prisoner inmate welfare fund. So they mess with their money, where the money is being allocated and spent like on canteen, recreation, entertainment, visiting all available television channels, hobbies, what's happening with their money. Three, the injustices, brutality, and overall human rights violations facing women and men prisoners. They're doing this work inside. It is so important that we keep their voices in the forefront, especially in at this time when there is more public dialogue, more public dialogue about what's happening with prisoners. It's their voices that we need to hear, because they are already doing the work. So in order to deal with these injustices, we insist on, one, the right to document, expose, and challenge abuses and violations. Think about what's happening on the street. As soon as you stand up, what happens? You become criminalized, right? Two, an end to violence and brutality at the hands of prison employees. They face violence 24/7. They are exposed to the violence of these guards 24/7, especially these guys who are now elders, because of the work, almost especially because of the work that they did to end indefinite solitary confinement, because they have now put CDCR on blast, and these guards and that have been there for a long time, these and these guard gangs inside, they cannot stand these men for making them have to save face. An end to police brutality, both inside and outside of prison. Again, we need hearing them. What's happening out here with police is the same thing that's happening with these guys inside, because the guards are just police on the inside. Four, and the right to be safe from retaliation and from being coerced, threatened, and blackmailed to betray fellow prisoners with false accusations. Governor Newsom just vetoed the bill that talked about that very thing, 1030s, which is confidential information, because what they do is they set prisoners against prisoners and make them debrief or snitch on each other, so they can get some crumbs and then make an excuse for the public to hear about why these guys are continually in solitary confinement. Okay, sorry, I have 3 minutes, okay, and I hope you all will get on board. You can go to we have a campaign website. It's Liberate Caged Voices, all one word, liberateCagedVoices.wixsite.com/site, SITE. Please go to that and you will get all the term, the tools, so how you can deal with or be on the campaign. And this is just one of the people that we have started the campaign with. Look at those, look at that data, look at those numbers. This is what's happening to our elders inside. And it's very important that we keep them alive as much as possible, because they're getting lost in this call for mass release. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nube. I really appreciate you coming on today. And it means a lot to know that there are people all across the nation doing this work. I think something that you said that really stood out to me was that you're working with principled individuals, right? So I think that when we think of and the way that the world has created the ideology behind who or what an inmate is, they've almost kind of rationed them down to being animals, just beasts in the wilderness that we have to lock away, throw them in and lock away the key. And what you're finding and what is the same as what I have found and so many other people is that these are real life human beings, and they're intelligent and they're strong and they're resilient and they're alpha. And so you will notice that a lot of times when just along this journey. And so I thank you for kind of pointing that out. And I think that, it makes a point to say that there are so many people who haven't, they're not aware of the clause inside of the 13th Amendment. That's not just your story. There's a lot of people who are like, what? I thought that's when we abolished slavery. Oh no, that's just when we made it legal. You didn't understand that part, right? So, and I think that we spoke yesterday about how sometimes the language will confuse us to a point where we don't even understand really what is being implied. And so I think that you've made some very, very key points. And I hope that if you want to go ahead and drop your information in the chat that you wanted us to look up, I can share that out into the live stream as well. So I thank you. You did an amazing job. It looks like the questions and comments that we had, someone said, Sister Nube, we're going to need you and Malik Washington to assist Jamila Land in removing California cause. And then a question that we have is, how do we make a distinction? How do we make a distinct abolition movement and prison reform, a distinction between abolition movements and prison reform? And what does abolishing prison slavery look like in contrast to the prison reform? What would you say to that?
It's always such a good question. And of course, the indomitable Max Parthas is the one who so eloquently can answer this question. So, but I will answer it this way for myself and what comes up for me. So abolition is a process, and I'll try and make this quick because I tend to make short stories long. But for me, abolition is a process, and I really see so I'm looking towards a practice of where we are looking at people and planet over everything, not profits over everything. It's really anti-capitalistic. How am I moving through my day, through my thoughts, through my word choice, that language that you talked about? And I'm a Lulu, and how that is creating a space for abolition, where we are now looking to care and to educate, transform, heal, really talk about what justice looks like, right? So I would like to burn down the prisons today. If we could burn them down and start all over, I'd go for that chaos rather than the chaos we have now. But we don't have that, right? We're not in a position to do whatever that takes, that kind of explosive overthrow, right? And so I'm very wary about prison reform. That it's not a path I want to go down, because I want for me personally, I want prisons abolished, because I think about somebody like a Dylan Roof, who Max has mentioned before. What kind of society are we creating that creates a 19-year-old white supremacist that is willing consciously to start a race war and is willing to face the consequences for that? That is not the servant of a cause that I want to be creating. So I feel like we're creating a world. So where's the place for him? Well, first it's, I want to create another world that doesn't produce somebody like that, because the one that we have now creates prisons where like all we have is to lock up people, get them away, but the power structure, the white supremacist power structure has the ability to put that on people that don't deserve it, like the guys that I'm advocating for. So I think it's about our words, our actions, and understanding that is a process that we need to work towards. And along that process is doing the things like getting rid of the exception clauses, getting rid of the 13th Amendment, abolishing that, and abolishing slavery. These are the things that we do along the way, because they are about abolishing those systems that create people like Dylan Roof and prisons the way that they are.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And as the famous, infamous, should I say, Max Prathis would say, slavery is a crime against humanity. Prison abolition or prison reform does not address this as a crime against humanity, and that is the dividing line. So I thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you're able to stick around for the rest of our speakers as well. It was a pleasure hearing your side of the story, your journey, your walk, and those things that are important to you. We really appreciate you taking the time out to share with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Up next, we have an amazing speaker, and he can be easily defined by very few words. And I kind of like that, a man just of a few words, but with a little bit of oomph behind him. We have Yusuf Hassan, and he is a slavery abolitionist and co-host of Abolition Today. So Yusuf, now it is your turn to go ahead and bless us with your presence.
Hey, peace and blessings, family. It's an honor and a privilege to be here, and tremendous pressure having to go behind Brother Bennu and our comrade Nube, you know. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen as I put together a little PowerPoint presentation. And so we can go through that, and we're going to deal with convict leasing. Let's see. Can everyone see it? Wait, I don't think I have the right screen up.
Yes.
I can see it.
Yeah, but I don't think it's the screen that I want to share. Hold on, let me switch screens. Wait, give me a second. Come on, Yusuf.
While he's doing that, this is Savannah. Looks like we have another question, so I'll go ahead and ask it while he's getting his PowerPoint together. On the Facebook Live, Arshad Nadir asked, while acknowledging the oppressive and marginalized conditions most of incarcerated have endured in society, contributing to their social relegation of criminality, what should be our approach to heal and repair the damage done to the person? Anybody want to tackle that? That's a great question. Actually, especially there's so many conversations now about trauma-informed care for folks, for the incarcerated community. So anybody on the panel would like to tackle that question? That's an amazing question. Nube, you have some.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer the whole question. I'll answer a part of it, and then I'll leave some for somebody else to follow back up on. But just as far as making people whole, I mean, just acknowledging the fact that these systems absolutely destroy people, absolutely rip the soul out of people. You know, it goes back to the conversation of how did we get here in the first place? And so the resources, the lack of resources is what will allow that harm to continue to exist. And so when we talking about abolition of slavery, it's just like when our ancestors were released from the plantation, you know, over 100 some years ago. They were released to nothing with nothing. And so the conversation about abolition also has to incorporate the conversation about reparations, about providing resources and building infrastructure and funding. What that would look like, how that process would go, I don't know, because this is an experience that no one has ever experienced before. We're the only people who have ever been through this. So we don't know yet what it's going to take to come out of it because it hasn't ended yet. And so that would just be part of it. When we're talking about, this is the reason why the conversation about reparations is so important to the overall conversation, because we have to be provided with the resources that kept other people in other communities from being put in these positions. And I think that until we get to that, we're not going to solve the totality of the problem. It looks like Brother Yusuf is ready, so let me back out.
Oh no, brother, you could have kept going, man. But does everyone see? I hope they see the right screen.
Well, we do see a screen, so that is a plus.
Yeah,
thank
I have two monitors, so I'm not sure of which
you.
screen I'm
Convict
actually
leasing,
showing.
the restructuring, secret compromise, reconstruction, the secret compromise.
Okay, good.
Okay, we can walk with you.
Yes, sir. So I didn't understand what he was saying, but we're gonna go through this.
Which
And
course? You say you had two screens.
yes.
It's okay. Go ahead, Yusuf. Thank you.
All right. So yeah, we want to talk about the about convict leasing. And many times when people talk about the 13th Amendment and saying it abolished slavery, and then they say, well, no, we know of the exception clause that left that loophole in there. But when people tell the timeline, they usually jump straight from the chattel slavery straight into Jim Crow. And they leave out the most important piece to the puzzle, which can lay out the intent. And convict leasing is that missing piece to the puzzle, because when we look at this, the Reconstruction period, when that came, hold on, I'm having problems. So when Reconstruction began, and it actually began a little bit before the 13th Amendment came, but when it actually occurred, the Civil War left the South's economy and its government in shambles. And so since they weren't going to get any help from Congress, the Southern states struggled to raise money to repair the damaged infrastructure most of them had during the Civil War. And so Reconstruction theoretically was about who got to be an American citizen. And it was in that period that the Constitution was amended to establish birthright citizenship through the 14th Amendment, which also guaranteed equality before the law regardless of race, allegedly, which we know that that's not true. And then the 15th Amendment, which was ratified in 1870, barred racial discrimination in voting, thus securing the ballot for Black men nationwide. And, you know, as we go through many of the things that I'm going to be talking about, we recognize that this is what's on paper, but we know as we go through history, we can see how none of this stuff was really happening. So the first step was Lincoln's 10% plan for Reconstruction. And Lincoln stated if 1/10 of a Confederate state's pre-war votes signed an oath of loyalty to the Union, they will be allowed to form a new state government with the same constitutional rights and powers they had enjoyed before the secession. None of the Confederate states accepted that plan. So what they proposed instead was what's referred to as the Wade-Davis Manifesto. And the Wade-Davis bill was the radical Republicans' answer to Lincoln's Reconstruction plan. It was written by Senator Bob Wade of Ohio on the left and Representative Henry Winter Davis of Maryland on the right. They felt that Lincoln's plan was not strict enough against those who seceded from the Union. In fact, the intention of the Wade-Davis bill was more to punish than bring the states back into the fold. And so because of this, when this got passed by Congress, Lincoln did what was called a pocket veto. And in him doing his pocket veto, it basically killed the bill. So it left it out there. And so Lincoln said, you know, the Southern states can pick which plan they wanted to use as they rejoined the Union. So what many of them decided to do was, okay, we're going to kind of freestyle this thing where we're going to pretend we want to be part of the Union, but we're going to carry on what we fought the Civil War over. And since the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except as punishment for a crime, well, the next phase was, hey, let's just start changing the laws. And that brought in convict leasing. And this is a great book here. I advise everyone, if you get a chance, read the book. It's called One Guy to Get Another by Matthew Mancini. And he has a quote in the book where he says, the only difference between slavery and convict leasing is that with convicts so plentiful, then they were seen as disposable. Because the difference now is you don't have to worry about runaways. You don't have to worry about, see, since it's being provided to you by the state, you don't have to worry about if they die or if they escape, because if it was just on the plantation, then they had to eat that cost. But now they had a situation where you have an unlimited supply. So convict leasing can be traced back to the 16th and 17th century British practice of sending persons convicted of crimes to the colonies in Maryland, Virginia, and Georgia for what was called convict assignment, which assigned these convicts to work for private individuals. Two things changed this process though. The Revolutionary War, where the British could no longer send their convicts to the colonies, and then chattel slavery in America, since plantation owners had their own supply of labor, you know, that was free, then they didn't need to convict, well, the British just lost that right. So the convict lease system created a private-public partnership in which prisoners were leased to the private companies for their labor. The convict lease system was used to undermine union organizing and perpetuate a form of slavery by imprisoning African Americans on false charges and forcing them to provide free labor. And Frederick Douglass even told us, after he went around the country and saw how it was being implemented, he said, under the convict lease system, the criminals are leased in bulk in their prospective states to whoever has the political ring, and that party, by paying a small sum to the state, sublets them in gangs to railroads and other corporations and to plantations. The state throws off the entire responsibility of caring for her convicts and turns them over into the hands of the lessee, whose only interest in them is to secure for himself what profit he could for their labor. And before the Civil War, the punishment of enslaved people had been the responsibility of their enslavers. However, with a general increase in Black incarceration during post-emancipation Reconstruction, the lack of available prison space became a significant and costly problem. Having elevated many petty misdemeanors to felonies requiring jail time, enforcement of Black codes, which targeted formerly enslaved people, greatly increased the number of prisoners needing housing. As a result of the aggressive and discriminatory enforcement of these Black codes, the majority of prisoners leased out by the prisons were Black people. So here it is an example of a Black code, vagrancy. As the convict lease system became a highly profitable business, sheriffs and deputies began to receive compensation for each convict they provided. The Vagrancy Act of 1865 read, all free Negroes and mulattoes over the age of 18 must carry written proof of employment. Those who do not shall be deemed vagrants and on conviction fined a sum not exceeding $50. And if proof was not provided, the individual was subject to a fine with no other means to pay other than peonage, meaning they had to lock him up. So as states struggled to build new prisons, some states tried paying private contractors to confine and feed convicts. Soon the states realized that by leasing them out to plantation owners and industrialists, they could turn over their prison population from a costly liability into a ready source of revenue. Markets for imprisoned workers soon evolved as private entrepreneurs bought and sold convict labor leases with only a small capital investment in convict workers. Employees had little reason to treat them well compared to their regular employees. While they were aware that convict laborers were often subjected to inhumane living and working conditions, the states found convict leasing so profitable that they were hesitant to abandon the practice. With only a small capital investment in convict workers, employers had little reason to treat them well compared to their, I'm sorry, I read that before. So state officials neither had nor wanted any authority to oversee the treatment of leased prisoners, choosing instead to give their employers complete control of their working and living conditions. And so the evolution of convict leasing, and it was reportedly started in Louisiana as early as 1844, but contract leasing spread quickly after the emancipation of enslaved people during the period of American Reconstruction following Civil War. Some of the locations were cotton plantations, sugar plantations, tobacco plantations, coal mines, railroads, and oil refineries. Coal mines and plantations were widely reported to have hidden burial grounds for bodies of released prisoners, many of whom had been beaten to death or left to die from work-related injuries. Witnesses told of organized gladiator-style fights to the death between convicts staged for the amusement of their overseers. In many cases, the court's records of convict workers were lost or destroyed, leaving them unable to prove that they had served their sentence or repaid their debts. And here you see a photo of some prisoners in 1907. This is in Birmingham, Alabama. Between 1875 and 1928, the state and counties of Alabama profited from a form of prison labor known as the convict lease system. Under this system, companies and individuals paid fees to state and county governments in exchange for the labor to work on farms, lumber yards, and in coal mines. Following their convictions, prisoners were transported directly to the work site and remained there for the duration of their sentences. State prisoners deemed unable to work were sent to the state penitentiary, After 1888, all women convicts were sent to Wetumpka, one of the names of the prisons down there. So in 1883 was a turning point in the convict lease system. Under financial reforms championed by Wharton Buckhead, the state legislature approved a plan that leased the majority of prisoners to a select number of coal operators. The Pratt Coal and Iron Company, the Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railroad Company, also known as TCI, and the Sloss Iron and Steel Company received almost exclusive rights to the labor of prisoners. In 1888, TCI negotiated a 10-year contract that entitled it to all able-bodied state prisoners. In exchange, TCI agreed to pay the state between $9 and $18.50 per month for each prisoner, depending on their abilities. Under Bankhead's plan, the coal companies built and operated prisons at the mine sites, which were clustered in the coal-rich area surrounding Birmingham. The largest prison mines were the Slope 2 and the Shaft mines, operated by TCI in Pratt City, and the Coalburg prison mine, operated by Sloss, with county prisoners. More than 95% of the county prisoners and 90% of state prisoners were African American, and whipping was the accepted form of punishment. Contractors whipped prisoners for insubordination and for trying to escape, but they also whipped to enforce labor discipline, prompting many to call the system a new form of slavery. One of the most egregious things that happened on April 8th, 1911. An explosion at the Banner Mine in Alabama killed 128 men, almost all of them African-American prisoners of the state. Many of them were serving time for misdemeanors such as violating prohibition and vagrancy, often known to be trumped up charges to help meet state quotas for convict labor. The men were effectively sentenced to enslavement and death through the convict leasing system. Within 2 weeks of the explosion, convicts were sent back to work at the mine. The use of the convict labor in Alabama mines was in response by the owners to earlier efforts by miners to join labor unions and strike for higher wages and better working conditions. Those better working conditions might have prevented the Banner explosion and other mine disasters. And convict leasing in Texas operated in the same manner as it did in other states. There were persistent shortages of funds in the state treasury, effectively tied the hands of prison officials who found they could not house and care for the larger number of individuals sentenced to prison. Leasing the prison and the inmates to private individuals appeared to be the best solution to the problems. The first leases in Texas came in 1867, when 2 railroad companies headquartered in the state hired prison inmates to help construct their road beds. The parties to these early agreements, despite the enthusiasm that greeted them, did not participate all of the problems inherent with the contractual agreement, such as being able to provide adequate food, clothing, and shelter. And by late 1871, the governor and most legislators agreed that they made so much money off of it, they decided, you know what, we need to do this again. So state officials entered into another agreement with Ward Dewey and Company of Galveston. And these men entered into an agreement where their leases were for 15 years, and they paid $5,000 per year for the first year, $10,000 per year for the next 5 years, and $20,000 per year for the last 5 years. And the revenue collected from the coal mine and coke ovens, they determined was going to be 372% times the cost of operating the prisons. So it made sense for them to get into convict leasing, because it normally cost them $2.50 a day to pay for normal free workers, where convict only costs 24 cents a day. And TCI housed an average of 400 prisoners, between 75 to 90% of those being African American. And on average, 10% of the convicts at the Lone Rock State Stockade died annually. But again, one dies, you get another. That's how they operated. And by January 1914, all of the prisoners were back under the exclusive control of the state, working within the walls of the prison on state-owned farms or in private property that the state had acquired. Then we can look at Tennessee. Now, according to the book, Black Coal Miners in America, Race, Class, and Community Conflict, by 1886, Tennessee came into contract with the state of Alabama that subjected every able-bodied convict to work in the TCI mine. So now this is sort of like the first iteration of like interstate travel, you know, taking prisoners from one state into another state. Human trafficking began. And the convict leasing system was both beneficial to TCI and the state of Alabama because it was broke, because the revenue collected from the coal and was just costing them too much money. And so this eventually led to the Coal Creek War. Oh, I thought I was on that screen. The Coal Creek War, which was on October 31st, 1891. And this was, the Coal Creek War was a labor uprising to protest convict leasing. A group of miners seized the Knoxville Iron Company stockade at Coal Creek in Tennessee. This contributed to the official end of convict leasing. And when we hear the official end, just like we know with the official end of slavery, they found another way to do it. So we look at Mississippi. And as usual, most of the laborers were African Americans. And so everything is done under the guise of rehabilitation. But convicts on county-run chain gangs, this is like when you first start hearing about chain gangs in the early 1900s, because there was so much backlash as word was getting out as to what was going on in the prisons. But it wasn't really backlash like that. It was just a few reporters were, you know, kicking up some dust. But convicts on county-run chain gangs often slept in cages and were subject to brutal corporal punishment. In fact, here's a photo showing some that are cuffed together at the ankle in small groups. They even had to sleep in chains. Not only were they walking around in chains working, but even when they went to sleep, if you could even call this sleeping quarters, but they were still shackled together. So after reaching its peak around 1880, Alabama became the last state to formally abolish state-sponsored convict leasing in 1928. But we know what they did. So chain gangs became the norm, and practices like chain gangs persisted until December of 1941, when President FDR, his Attorney General Francis Biddle, put out what was called Circular 3591, which is a directive clarifying federal regulations for handling cases related to involuntary servitude, enslavement, and peonage. But here's the kicker. So this circular amended a previous definition of peonage as voluntary servitude plus debt, and removed the debt element. Instead, attorneys were instructed to disregard the element of debt and to depend upon the issue of involuntary servitude and slavery. So in other words, hey, let's keep doing it. Let's keep doing what we've been doing because, you know, we're making too much money on this. So there came a period when Congress began passing certain laws trying to regulate the industry, because when there's a lot of money involved, of course, there's going to be corruption. So one of the first things was the Hawes-Cooper Act of 1929. In the early 1900s, most prisons were involved in selling on the open market products made by inmates. Sort of like the first phases of the private prison industry, and especially when it comes to industrialization within the prisons. The money earned from these sales was most often used to finance the prison itself. However, the manufacturers, employers, and labor leaders in the open market argued that they could not compete with the prisons, which had a free labor force that could not strike. State governments could outlaw the sale of convict-made goods from their own state, but they had no control over the sale of prison-made goods imported from another state. So the passage of the Hawes-Cooper Convict Labor Act allowed states to remove the interstate commerce nature of prison-made goods and to prohibit the sale of such goods in their states, even if they were produced in another state. Then came Unicor. And Unicor was a government-owned corporation which employed offenders incarcerated in correctional facilities under the Federal Bureau of Prisons. The Federal Acquisition Regulation required federal agencies, with the exception of the Department of Defense, to procure products offered by Unicor. And then Unicor actually took on another iteration around 1977, which kind of went back on many of these things that were passed within the Hawes-Cooper Act and Ashurst-Summers Act and the Fair Labor Standards and Sumner-Ashurst Act of 1940. So where they made it where Unicor could now solicit bids from the private sector. So now private corporations were given the opportunity to actually get these products that are produced by the inmates. And of the eligible inmates held in federal prison, 19,720 or 18% are employed by Unicor. Bear with me, we're almost done. We're almost done, everyone. And so right after that, World War II happened. And so during World War II, those federal prohibitions on inmate labor were temporarily relaxed, and prison industries produce much of the needed war material. So again, this is like another phase of creating that market for inmate-made products. And then of course, after World War II ended, the federal government again imposed these restrictions. And again, there's a but. And this time the but was the Percy Amendment from 1979. And in 1979, Congress relaxed some of its strictures on prison labor when it passed the Justice System Improvement Act, which was referred to as the Percy Amendment. And this amendment, oh, I think I made a mistake in my notes, but you have to excuse me on that one. But this allowed the private companies to employ prison labor, since most business markets cross state lines. That's basically what the Percy Amendment did. It opened the door for interstate travel and interstate commerce on prison labor. And so that also leads to the modern slavery acts and actors. So if we want to look at the private prison industry, we can start right there in 1954 with Wackenhut Corrections. Wackenhut Corrections was started by 4 former FBI agents, and it was named after one of its founders, George Wackenhut. And this company eventually became part of G4S Secure Solutions, which is an international private security company with contracts with numerous governments. Its prison industries arm owns the GEO Group, which owns and operates prison facilities in 14 states, and it's the largest private employer in Africa. Then we have Corrections Corporation of America, and it's now known as CoreCivic. This was founded in 1983 with one of its major investors at its founding being Vanderbilt University. By 2014, CCA operated 22 federal prisons. By 2016, CCA and the GEO Group operated more than 170 prisons, and revenues were 1.79 billion. When we think about 3 strikes laws, mandatory minimums, truth and sentencing laws, and many more, they were all funded by CoreCivic and GEO Group, and they pay ALEC, the American Legislative Executive Council, to push up, and they actually write the laws that the senators and the congressmen, that Congress actually passes. And we've seen videos of people actually reading things on the Senate floor, the House floor, with ALEC's logo at the top of it. And the last thing I'd like to speak about is, or as you see the timeline, we have Wackenhut Corrections, Nixon's war on drugs in 1971, Reagan's Comprehensive Crime Control Act in 84, Clinton Biden's crime bill. These are the progressions that everything has gone through. And then finally, something that I just really became aware of is PRIDE, Prison Rehabilitative Industries and Diversified Enterprises. Florida PRIDE is another private prison industry. It's called the Prison Industry Enhancement Program. And what they presented themselves as is sort of like, oh, we're gonna train the inmates, give them skills, and then when they come out, we're gonna hire them and they can work for us. But it was just another iteration of private prisons. And what they're doing is securing these same people. Once they get released, they created another program called RISE. And they're making money hand over fist. And so we can see throughout history, everything just went from one iteration to another, carrying on the same legacy. Nothing was ever new. And if we just look at some of the companies nowadays, and I'll just mention a couple that are making money hand over fist in the prisons. I mean, we can look at those, we can look at JPay, we can look at Keefe, JPay doing the telephone service, and Global Tel Link. There's Keefe. There's Keefe doing the commissary. We have Securus is another company. There's Corizon with the healthcare services. There's so many companies that contract and make money off of the prisons, and even something as simple as Strategic Packing Solutions. Now, many people have never heard of this company, but many people buy their product almost every single day. If you ever buy bad coffee at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, and you look at who makes it, it's Strategic Packing Solutions, and that's a private prison company. So it's prevalent all throughout. I'm gonna turn the reins back over because I've been talking for a long time. I apologize.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. We really, as long as you were talking, it didn't really matter because at the end of the day, it created a real life pain of the timeline, right? So as your timeline kept going on, helped us to create an understanding of the actual timeline of slavery that we've actually endured over all of this time. And as you see, 1865, we came right out of slavery, going right into a new form. And so to see, our parents' birth dates pass on your timeline and my birthday pass on your timeline, it kind of helped to create a very realistic picture of just how long we've been enduring the timeline of slavery. So, and I think that is something that people truly don't understand. So I thank you for all of the knowledge. And as Max said, he's going to get some college credits for your course today. So I thank you for taking the time. That definitely was needed, and a lot of people probably have been enlightened by that. And that's the most important part, creating awareness. So I thank you for your diligence, truly.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and
Are
up
there any
next,
questions?
we'll do those at the end. We have Representative
Okay.
Sandra Hollins coming on the line next. And Sandra
Hey,
Hollins,
Sandra.
thank you so much for being here with us today. Sandra is the first Black American woman elected to the Utah State Legislature. She is a member of the Utah House of Representatives, where she has proudly served District 23 since 2015. She successfully passed legislation banning knee on the neck restraint by law enforcement, requiring cultural training for school officers, increasing job opportunities for the formerly incarcerated, and removing the provision that allows for slavery in the Utah State Constitution. In the House of Representatives, she is a member of Social Services Appropriations, Health and Human Services, Law Enforcement, and Criminal Justice, Bear Park Oversight Panel, and the Child Welfare Oversight Panel. So she is really busy working on a whole lot of different human rights components. And so it is an honor to have you here with us today. And so I look forward to the knowledge that you're going to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I'm going to try not to take too much of your time today, but I just want to kind of give you an overview of how it came about that taking slavery out of our Constitution, how I started doing this, and now it's on the ballot this year, in which we're going to be voting on it. So I just kind of wanted to give you a timeline of what happened, how we went about doing it, and how we got to where we are today. So in 2018, I had been watching what was going on in Colorado. Know that this was their second attempt to take it out of their Constitution. But it never dawned on me to look at our Constitution, Utah's Constitution. Never thought it would be a part of ours. Thought Colorado was just kind of an exception, having it in theirs. So late one night, maybe about 9 or 10 o'clock one evening, I was happened to be up doing work, and a friend of mine who happens to be a reporter, Brittany Johnson, here in Utah, called me because her and I have been discussing what was going on in Colorado, and she called and just asked me a question. She said, "Rep, are you aware that this is a part of Utah's Constitution?" And of course, my reply to her was, "No, it's not." And she said, "Oh, yes, it is." She said, "I'm sending you all the information now. I've been researching it." And so she sent all of the information to me. And then after giving me time to read it, she gave me a call and said, "Okay, this is a part of Utah Constitution." Then she asked me a very important question. She said, "What are you going to do about it?" I said, "I'm going to take it out of our Constitution. What else am I going to do with this once I have this information? It's got to go." So that began the journey of me working on HJR 8, a resolution to take the places on the ballot so the state of Utah can vote on this. I presented it in the House. And it went through without a problem. In fact, the room was packed when I presented this resolution, and the chair of the committee, the Law Enforcement Committee, asked the question, who in this room is here to speak in favor of this resolution? And everyone in the room stood. There was not one person there to speak against this resolution. So then it went over to the Senate, and it stalled. It stalled a little bit over there. There was some concerns about whether judges will have the ability to continue to issue community service in lieu of jail time. And so we were able to pull up some case law in which that was already challenged and give that to them, but they still didn't feel comfortable with that. And so they asked us to put a provision in there that stated that this would not affect that system, which I agree to get it out of the Senate, and it passed. It passed unanimously in the Senate. So now it's on our ballot. So a part of the history of Utah and its slavery, the first slave was brought to Utah actually in 1847. We all know the Emancipation Proclamation was 1863. Utah actual constitution was not written until 1896, I believe. And so this was placed in our Constitution almost 30 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. So it should not have ever been placed in there. I've spoken to some historians here in Utah, and we've talked about it. We have not been able to find any evidence of convict leasing in the state, but we kind of think that it was placed in there because Utah was still trying to join the union. And so they wanted to fall in line to what the federal government was doing. And so as a result, they placed this in our Constitution. I've been receiving overwhelmingly support for this piece of legislation. We've been able to bring on the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, both work together. When I first presented this bill, first came up with the idea to present this resolution, I happened to be up at the Capitol and saw some of the Republican leadership, and we had a conversation about it, and they said they're definitely on board. They wanted this not to be a partisan issue. A Republican or a Democrat issue. They wanted us to work together. So my sponsor on the Senate side is a Republican. And we worked together to get this piece of legislation passed. I brought on religious leaders. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the biggest organized religion here in the state of Utah. They came out in full support of it, saying that they support this piece of legislation, that it needed to be taken out of our Constitution. Brought on other religious leaders in the Jewish community, in the Muslim community, and the Baptist community. All of them came on board and said that they support this piece of legislation. The only pushback I received, there was no organized pushback, but I have received a few emails from people saying that if someone committed a crime, they should go back into slavery. Someone said that it would be more palatable to them if I just replace the word slavery with human trafficking and leave it in our Constitution. Someone accused me of trying to take down monuments, that this is a monument that I'm trying to take down. So that's just a little bit of part of the pushback. But like I said, there has not been any organized effort to go against this. One of the best things that we were able to do is we formed a coalition, Utah Coalition to Abolish Slavery. And they have been awesome. It's a group of individuals from different organizations. I brought the Divine Nine on board. They've been a part of it. And the ACLU, Alliance for a Better Utah, representative from the Republican Party, have been a part of that coalition. We've had students who've been a part of that coalition. So just an array of people who have all come together, and they've been working on it. They've done most of our campaigning, well, all of our campaigning has been through social media. We were able to raise a little bit of funds to help with this, but social media and texting is how we have been, we've managed to get the word out. The Republican Party did, in calling and doing some polling, have asked some of their supporters about whether they support it, and they say that they have overwhelmingly received people who saying that they will be voting in favor of this. So we're looking for it to pass. We don't see any reason why it should not pass, but you know, we are living in crazy times, so very little surprise or shock me anymore. So with that, I'm open to any questions.
Wow, that's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us that journey. Can you tell me though, what kind of just blew my whole mind was how you just mentioned a plethora of different groups of people. I don't know if anybody caught all that. I mean, you were talking about the Church of Latter-day Saints, you were talking about, the Republican Party, you were talking about all different groups of people. What type of I guess like plan did you put in place to go ahead and try to make that happen? Because I think that as we continue to journey on through this process, I think that it's more important that we're able to attract the hearts and minds of the masses.
Mhm.
And I think that is something that has, for a lack of, for a whole lot of years, been a huge problem as far as how we're able to do that. So can you share with us a way to, confidently reach into those places that we may not be as comfortable in order to gain some, some allies?
Sure. I think one of the things that was a benefit for me is that I already have had established relationships with each of those organizations. I had real good relationships with people in each one of those. So I was able to reach out to individuals and have this conversation and talk about the history and educate them and of why this is important to us. And so I think that is one of the key things. If you're looking at running this in your state, have somebody who has developed those relationships across the aisle, and have those real good relationships in the community. I think that is one of the key things. I think the other thing is that with everything that has happened now, been happening since Mr. Floyd, a lot of people right now in this state are ready to look at ways they can start healing.
Yes.
And I was, when that first happened, of course, we had the civil unrest here. And the Speaker of the House told everybody pretty much stand down. I want Sandra to take the lead in this. And I think that was one of the biggest benefits, is that people trust me and was looking to me to take the lead and look for me to take the lead in these type of issues and trust what I say. And so they're willing to follow me and follow when I say, let's vote for this. They do.
That's awesome. That's amazing. I think that people have to understand just what you said, building those relationships, building trust with other people, especially in the Black community. That's something that we really struggle with. And so I think it's important that, we highlight that, because, as my, for myself, just in a fairly new advocacy process, and trying to, bring about some change within some of the legislation that we have in, the states that I'm working in, you do find that it is difficult, and you don't know which doors to knock on and how to start building those relationships. And so that's really key and important. And I think that is of great value. Thank you.
Yeah, and one of the key things to remember, you don't have to agree with everything everybody is doing. Some of my colleague who is running this on the Senate side, there's a lot of things him and I don't agree on. And that's fine. But this was something we can agree on. So we agree on this today, and tomorrow we may be fighting about something else, going at it about something else. And that's okay. But I think with this piece of legislation, it is very, very important that you bring all of your key players to the table in the community, but also at your capital, and make this not about Democrats or Republican. Make this about a human issue, and make this about a nonpartisan issue. And I think with that, you will be able to bring more people on board with it.
Thank you so much. Savannah, you have a question for Representative Hollins?
Yeah, it's more like a comment. I just really appreciate that you brought to light that you actually had to compromise with the folks that you were working with, right? I think that's an important piece to highlight for anyone who's working toward being successful, that, it's okay that you don't win every single battle, and, you have to be able to speak and, and listen as well. But I wanted to know, in relation to HJR 8, were there any provisions made to that particular legislation in order to make it, outside of, the question that was posed about the community service, were there any other provisions made in order to make it appealing to both parties or make it bipartisan?
No, that was the biggest one, that we had to put that provision in there. That was the only one. And I've had some people in the community they were concerned, and rightfully so, about that provision that was placed in there. And my argument to them was, yes, we still need to have a conversation about what's going on in our prison system. I want to have that conversation. This is a small part of it. Let's get this out, and then let's start having that other part of this conversation and start moving forward from there. But sometimes, when you have a big elephant, you have to start with the small part, the small part when you're trying to chop up an elephant, and then we'll keep moving and moving and moving. And so that's been my argument for that. And in fact, having a conversation coming up pretty soon, hopefully around some things around prison reform.
Awesome, awesome. We do have another question for you, Benu.
Yes, thank you very much, Representative Holland. You kind of just answered in the last part of your comment, but I was just curious as to the fact that Utah is acknowledging that this is wrong and that people have been subjected to it for however many years it's been in the Constitution. I was wondering, what kind of thoughts have you all into addressing the wrong that have been done to people in the past, first, and secondly, what type of industries or labor is it that the people in your state are currently doing under this amendment right now?
Yeah. I could tell you one of the things that I've been helping to address, one of the wrongs that I'm trying to right. We have a number of people who were enslaved who were buried without headstones in this state. Last year, I was able to help place the headstone on 2 graves. We're in the process now of trying to identify all of those individuals, to see who they are, to give them to tell their stories, and to give them proper headstones. So that's one of the things that we're looking at doing, to start righting some of the wrong that was done in our history, and plus taking this out of slavery, out of it. Now, as far as the industries, I don't know any particular industry, but I do know that Utah's prison system, they are involved in a lot of different contracts. I don't have a list of those contracts right now. That they do a lot of the furniture for the state and a lot of the universities. So they do a lot of that. They do the license plates. They're involved in that industry. So I know those are 2 of the biggest industries that the prisoners are involved in.
Okay, I think there's another question is, were there any major players in Utah that were benefiting from having that provision in there? Guessing that probably there aren't, or you probably would have had some organized opposition, or
Yeah, there wasn't any big players that benefited from this being a part of our Constitution. My messaging has always been around that this no longer reflects our values and who we are as a state. And so it needs to be taken out of our Constitution. So no, there hasn't been any opposition. There hasn't been anybody that's benefit. But as I said, we're living in times right now that who knows if this is not taking out 20, 30, 40 years from now, some lawyer may have the bright idea that we're going to bring this up, or somebody may have the bright idea that we're going to bring it up. So it needed to go. Our state constitution is one of our most important institutional documents.
Yes.
And it needed to change, and it needed to reflect the times we are
Yes.
in right now.
Yes, and I can't agree with you more. How do you think that this, how will this impact prisons when this legislation is changed? Like what type of effect have you guys thought about that?
Mhm. And we don't expect that it's going
I mean,
to.
given that, we're dealing with those.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we don't expect that it's going to impact our prisons just yet. Our workers are here in statute are not forced to work, it's volunteer, although they do receive the wages that they do receive or can be seen as slave wages, very low wages. I think it's like 30 cents or something like that. Very low wages. We don't suspect that it's going to have an impact now, but that is something that a conversation that needs to be had, a different conversation outside of this one that needs to be had on what changes that we need to be looking at and making in our prison system. Look, the prison system, our prison right now is in the process of moving, and it is moving to my district. My district is going to play host to the prison system. That's a whole nother story. But so I do have an interest in everything from the type of training they're going to be providing, education they're going to be providing out there, and how are we going to prepare individuals so that when they do leave out of that system, how are they going to be successful? Are we setting them up for successful? And I'm talking about everything from having an ID when they leave there, so they are able to apply for employment and different services, like I said, to education, to jobs. So it's something that I'm very interested in.
Got you. I think that definitely just from all the work that you've done, excuse me, one moment.
I guess I'll pick up real quick. We did have a few questions that we kind of skipped over. Thank you, Representative Hollins. I don't think there were any other questions. I think Lulu took all of those. However, I'm gonna go back because someone had a question earlier.
I have the questions.
Got it?
Apologize. Yep, I'm back.
Yeah. All right.
1 second. Okay, so the question that we have, and this can be for anyone on the platform. I know that for the specific question for Yusef is if you can let us know who the Ohio lawmaker's name was that you were making reference to. If you can just give us that information, there's a specific question about that. Yusef. Okay. Otherwise, it says a comment that we have is that I think we can learn a lot from the abolitionist movements of the past, learning how to fight and adapt strategies to overturn prison slavery, just as the states modified their strategies from the institutions of plantation slavery to convict leasing to the prison industrial complex. So I think that, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here this evening with that information. Just started with Benu giving us the information to the breakdown timeline and all of the work that Nube has been doing. But Yusef really kind of broke that down as far as the information in regards to the timeline of things. I know that, let's see.
There was a question for both Benu and Yusuf actually.
Yeah.
And the question was, do you see any commonalities between vagrancy laws and Black codes and modern day habitual offender statutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's correlation. I mean, nothing ever changed from generation to generation. It just took on new names and everything expanded. Just as we take, going back to the overseers and, the slave patrols and the patty rollers, they eventually gave birth to the police departments. And so that mentality carried on through the police departments. And it's part of the reason why, even when you look at the patty rollers, you have, this mentality among many white people that their job is to police Black people. And this is what came up with the Karen syndrome, where, just any place that they think we don't belong, they have a right to challenge us, and they have a right, to call the police on us. So it's just a carryover from what was going on back then.
To add on to that, the motivation or incentive or whatever the word is behind those laws are the same. They passed the Black codes and vagrancy laws for a particular purpose, to re-enslave and then to exploit the labor. And then when you come back up to the laws that we have today, the mandatory minimums, the habitual offender laws, the repeal of the parole laws, you'll see that all of those laws were enacted at the same time that these laws that Brother Yusuf pulled up, showing the changes in the access to the labor inside of the prisons. The moment that the labor was granted to the private corporations inside the prison, it's the same time that the laws were changed to make sure that people who were brought into the system stayed longer, had less benefits, had less rights. So absolutely, they are the same. They're really, the essence is the same, just the title of them is the only thing that we've see change so far.
Thank you. And I believe Max had a comment that he wanted to make.
Yes. First of all, thank you everyone for your wisdom and knowledge today. We just soaked it in. But in regards to something that Representative Hollins said, that she spoke to some historians and they were unable to determine if and when there was some convict leasing. It actually occurred in 1909. Your roads were built by prisoners. They were offered 10 days off for every 30 days worked. And that's how your roads got built. Just want to let you know.
Thank you, Max. All right. Well, I thank everyone for coming out tonight. It has been a very informative experience. I thank each and every one of you for coming out and speaking with us today. And I invite you and encourage you to show up with us tomorrow for our grand finale of this virtual rally about freeing the 13th Amendment. It has been a pleasure and an honor to be amongst all of you this evening. I thank you all for your time, and I look forward to all of your work out here in this world that I want to be able to support and stand behind as well. So thank you again. You can
I just
salute
want
to
to
Go
add,
ahead.
I'm sorry. So tomorrow's our last day, and we will be simulcasting along with Live from the Plantation, which is a radio blog talk show hosted by Benu Hannibal. And so I encourage everyone to come out and hear from the guys, and hopefully someone will call in directly on the inside. We will have Ivan Kilgore speaking. We have Malik Washington. I'll be talking about efforts in Texas, and then Dennis Febo in New Jersey. I will be finishing up speaking about next steps and strategies for those states who are interested in becoming more involved. So I hope everyone's available to tune in, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Great job, everybody. Good night.